Okay, so now I want to turn to the question of parables and what are parables, what are they for, how do they work, and what do they teach us? Parables are one of the most distinctive aspect of Jesus' teaching. And I think sometimes we don't recognise how distinctive they are. We somehow like to pretend that everyone was doing them at the time or they're perfectly normal. Actually, once we start thinking about them, they're really distinctive. This perhaps isn't surprising. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, people respond by saying, "What teaching is this? Is this? He teaches not like the teachers of the law and the scribes." Jesus' teaching was distinctive, and the parables is a big part of that. So what is a parable? Many people have picked up various ideas which I want to suggest are wrong. People say things like it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's theology made simple for the simple people. Or basically approach it as if it's an illustration. This is vicars making Jesus in their own image. If I'm sitting there on a Saturday evening, thinking about the sermon for tomorrow, what many preachers will do, is they think of the point they want to make. But then they think, if I just tell people the point, they won't remember it. So they then think, let's think of an illustration. I've got my point, but let's think of an illustration to help the people remember it. And we paint Jesus as doing the same as we do. But I think when you look at the parables, they just don't work like that. With almost all of the parables, it is impossible to tell me what that point is. What is the point that this story is trying to illustrate? Actually, when we read the parables, when we ponder the parables, we find they're open-ended. They're ambiguous. They don't have a point. They leave you dissatisfied. They leave you wanting more. They leave you thinking, can it really be like this? They're not straightforward, which is not surprising because God is not straightforward and life is not straightforward. Parables do not give easy answers for children, as if we need to become people who deal in easy answers. Parables make us think about hard things. So I'm going to illustrate this for you. I know you don't believe me, but maybe in 5 minutes' time you'll start to think I'm not completely barking. So I want to illustrate this. Parable of the sower. Parable of the sower. How does it go? The parable of the sower. A man went out to sow. Yeah, all right. That's normal life, isn't it? This man went out to sow, and he walked along, sowing a seed. Oh, there we go, sowing a seed onto the ground, onto the path. The bird's coming. He's trampling it. All the farmers listening to Jesus speaking in Capernaum will be thinking, "What idiot is this? Does this carpenter turned preacher not understand anything about farming? Your precious seed, you're just going to scatter around, trample it underfoot, let the birds come and eat it, scatter it into the thorns." So something starts off with a human situation. A farmer goes out to sow. But somewhere in the parable, it always diverts from human life. And that is where we find the point. So in our sower, what we have is the sower goes out to sow, and this sower is reckless. This sower seems to have no sense. He's scattering the seed far more recklessly than a sensible human farmer would. And the parable goes on, doesn't it? It goes on and it explains, yes, lots of this seed is then lost. But in the end, the farmer gets an amazing crop. And so, left puzzling, is that what God is like? That we would be very careful about where we sow. We would be very careful about husbanding the church's resources, being sensible about what we do, not wasting the effort and the seed on the unlikely places. But we read the parable about God and we think, God is reckless with this seed, and yet it produces a good crop. Is that something we should be copying? What would that look like in our churches? if we were as reckless as God is? Take another one, the parable of the sheep, the shepherd. How does it go? Shepherd has 100 sheep. He loses one of them. Yeah, that's true to life. That's how life works. These things happen. So what will a shepherd do? He'll abandon the 99 in the wilderness to go and seek for the lost one. Does this carpenter turned preacher not know anything about sheep? How many of those 99 are still going to be alive when he comes back after his search across the hills? Even if he finds the lost one, how many of the 99 are going to have fallen off a cliff or been eaten by wolves? This is bonkers. But the parable describes a God who seems to be so concerned for the one, he's reckless with the 99. And then how does the parable go on? So the shepherd, he goes over hill and dale to find the sheep. And what does he do? He comes back saying, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." I don't know about you, but if you do something wrong at work, which do you go for? Option 1, cover it up quick and hope no one spotted it. Or option 2, walk back into the office saying, "I made a massive mess, but don't worry, I've got away with it." You cover it up, don't you? So here we have a God whose compassion for the lost one is so overpowering he's going to be reckless. And his joy over finding the lost one is so overpowering he behaves in fairly foolish ways. So this is not the action of a normal shepherd. Let's not try to turn God into one of us. We hear this parable and we think, is my compassion for the lost as great as God's? Do I have more compassion than sense, like God does? And am I so emotionally involved that my desire to rejoice overpowers everything when people are found? And the third and final parable to tease you with, and then you can ponder yourselves whether I'm telling you the truth. The parable of the tenants in the vineyard. How does it go? Rich man builds a vineyard, doesn't want to do the work himself. Yes, that's true to life, isn't it? Gives it out to tenants who farm it. It's true to life. Harvest comes, the tenants think, why should we give all this produce back to the landlord? That's true to life. The tenants refuse to, so the landlord sends his servant demanding the produce. The servants send him around empty-handed. So far, true to life. This is how humans behave. So the landlord, the master, sends the armed guards, and there's a fight, and people are killed. Sadly, true to life. So then the master says, "Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll send my son, unarmed, on his own, to go and get the fruit." Well, that's not going to work, is it? That's stupid. That's not what any human being would do. Any human would think they've had their chance. They just need to be destroyed. They just need the vineyard, they need to be thrown out of the vineyard. But God sends his son in this final reckless offering of a chance to people who don't deserve it. The parable works where it differs from human life. We see what God is like when it differs from what we would do. And that's how our parables work. And so there's something in there for us when we read the parables in the Gospels. But finally, there's something in there about how we teach and how we speak to others. In the parables, in Jesus' distinctive teaching, he didn't give people the doctrines and tell them to believe them. He didn't lay out in bullet points the meaning. He told stories about what God was like, which were deeply disturbing. And he let us work it out for ourselves, what difference this should make in our lives. And so if you're someone who's going to preach, if you're someone who speaks to other people, who teaches, who runs a Bible study group, can you dare to be like Jesus and not give answers, but provoke people to think for themselves?